All right, let's pull back the curtain on the web. We're going to talk about the one thing, the one language, that literally every single website is built on. It's the secret skeleton holding the entire internet together. So let's jump right in.
Have you ever just stopped and wondered, when you're scrolling through your favorite site or checking the news, what's actually holding all that stuff together? How is it not just a complete jumbled mess on your screen? What's the secret ingredient?
Well, the answer is HTML. That stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it is, no exaggeration, the absolute foundation of the web. The best way to picture it? Think of it as the skeleton. It's the bones, the core structure, that everything else, all the cool stuff, gets built upon. So first up, we're going to take a closer look at what this skeleton is actually made of. How do all the bones connect?
And then we'll get our hands dirty. Because, let's be real, the best way to understand something is to actually do it. We're going to build our very first web page, starting with absolutely nothing and turning it into something real.
Okay, so every single website in the world starts with one simple file, index.html. That's it. It's like the universal front door. When you go to a website, your browser is basically programmed to look for that exact file name to show you the homepage.
And get this, the entire basic skeleton of any web page comes down to just these 4 parts. It's so simple. First, you just tell the browser, hey, this is an HTML document. That's what doctype does. Then you have the HTML tag. Think of that as the big container that holds everything. Inside that, you've got 2 main parts. The head, which is like the brain. It has all the behind-the-scenes info the browser needs, stuff you don't actually see. And then the body. This is the good stuff. This is where everything you do see on the page lives. Oh, and here's a quick pro tip for you. You can write little notes to yourself right in the code using these things called comments. The browser completely ignores them, so they don't show up on the page. But trust me, they are a total lifesaver for remembering what you were thinking.
All right, skeleton, check. Now it's time for the fun part. Let's start putting some flesh on these bones, Let's add some actual content.
So, what's the first thing any page needs? A big, bold title, right? For that, you use heading tags. The H1 is like your main headline, the most important one. Then you can use H2, H3, and so on, all the way down to H6 for smaller subheadings. It's a super easy way to create a clear structure. And what about just regular text? For that, you just wrap it in a P tag. P for paragraph. Easy. This just tells the browser, hey, treat this as a block of text. Super simple, but it's the workhorse for all your written content.
Okay, now this is where things start to get really interesting. Tags on their own are cool, but what gives them their real power are things called attributes. Just think of an attribute as an extra piece of information you give a tag, like a special instruction that changes how it behaves.
Let me show you a perfect example. So there's this A tag, which is for making links. But a link that doesn't go anywhere is pretty useless, right? So you add the href attribute to tell it where to go. See how that works? The tag says this is a link, and the attribute says here's where it links to. That's the key right there.
It's the exact same idea for images. You use the image tag to say I want an image here, but the browser needs to know which image. So you use the source attribute, that's short for source, to point to the image file. And you also add an alt attribute, which is just some text that describes the image. That's super important for extensibility, and it'll show up if the image ever breaks.
And hey, HTML has a bunch of other quick and dirty tags for styling text. Want to make something bold, or italic, or underlined? Yep, there are tags for all that. You can even do fancy stuff like subscript to writing H2O, or superscript for math stuff. It's all just ready to go. Okay, so we know how to add individual things, headings, paragraphs, images. But how do you start organizing them into an actual layout? Let's talk about that next.
So you need to know about 2 super important tags for layout, div and span. A div is like a big empty box. It's a block element, which means it takes up its own line and you use it to group big sections of your page together. Now, a span is totally different. It's inline. Think of it like a highlighter. You can use it to wrap just a single word or a few words inside a paragraph to style them differently without creating a new line. Box versus highlighter. That's the main difference.
But what if you've got data? Like a list of names, grades, and subjects. If you just threw that into a paragraph, it'd look like a total mess. So how do you handle that? The answer? HTML tables. With a few simple tags, one for the table itself,
one for the rows, and one for each cell of data, you can create a perfectly neat and tidy grid. It's designed to bring order to that kind of chaos. And there's even more. You can make bullet point lists, numbered lists for instructions, and this is really cool. Modern HTML has these things called semantic tags. So instead of a generic div box, you can use a tag called header or footer or nav. They work like boxes, but they also give the browser a clue about what's inside them, which is a huge deal for things like search engines.
So if you remember one thing, remember this. HTML is the skeleton. That's it. It doesn't do colors. It doesn't do animations. It doesn't make things interactive. Its only job, its one job, is to provide the fundamental structure. And without that skeleton, you've got nothing. The rest of the web just couldn't exist.
And look, like anything new, the only way to get good at this is to practice. So don't just sit there watching. Give it a try. Open a text file, start typing, and see what happens. The more you build and experiment, the more confident you're going to get.
So there you have it. You now know the secret of the web skeleton. We've handed you the blueprint. Now the real question is, what are you going to build with it?